Hi guys, welcome to the channel. I'm Dee, and this is my feline life mate, Stud. Before we get started, we would love it if you subscribe to the channel. And if you like the video, please give it a big fat thumbs up or down. Who am I to tell you what to do? Today, we're going to talk about a somber and heart-wrenching story that shook a community to its core. My community, in fact. This is the tragic tale of Matthew Margolies, a young boy who, in 1984, was brutally taken away at just 13 years old. Join us as we explore the details of this cold case, the investigation that ensued, and the lasting impact on those who knew and loved him. Full disclosure, because this case is about the untimely death of a child, please proceed with caution. Matthew Margolies was a vibrant and spirited 13-year-old boy from the close-knit, working-class neighborhood of Pemberwick. Pemberwick was located in the Glenville area of bougie Greenwich, Connecticut, close to the New York border. Greenwich, as you may know, was also the home of another, albeit infamous, murder, that of Martha Moxley in 1975. Martha's murder involved the Skakel family, immediate family of the Kennedy clan. Both families were wealthy and lived in affluent Belhaven, a gated community in Greenwich set back along the water's edge of Long Island Sound. Matthew, on the other hand, lived a modest life with his mom Mary Ann, a nurse, and his sister Stacy, 3 miles away in the lower middle-class neighborhood of Glenville called Pemberwick, also dubbed the Happy Valley. Glenville was and still is a very safe area, as is Greenwich as a whole. How do I know? I was born and raised in Greenwich and lived there for over 30 years before moving to a nearby town. Growing up, my own working-class Italian neighborhood of Chickahominy was nestled in between both Martha and Matthew's neighborhoods, and even though Matthew was 4 years younger than me, we knew a lot of the same people. I had friends in his neck of the woods and would often hang out in Pemberwick. Crime was almost non-existent in Greenwich, save for vandalism and petty theft, and yes, I'm here to confirm that the old "nobody locked their doors back then" trope is absolutely 100% true. Except for our house. My mom had that shit locked up like Fort Knox. But anyway, it was the 80s, the generation of self-preservation, latchkey kids not needing to be home until the streetlights came on, and this was very much the case for Greenwich too. Matthew's mom worked in nearby Stamford, Connecticut, and was known for taking on long, exhausting shifts, trying to provide the best she could for her family. While at work, she entrusted her recently widowed mom to watch her kids, who lived just a few short blocks away. But she also had a lot of trust in her children as well. Matthew was a good kid, responsible, respectful, and polite. Matthew had been super close to his maternal grandfather, George, who had passed away just a few weeks prior to Matthew's own death. His grandfather instilled in him a love of the outdoors, and especially for fishing. Matthew was a skilled angler and would often be seen by the banks of the Byram River, not too far from his home. On Friday, August 31st, 1984, Matthew left his grandma's house and went out to fish just as he had so many times before. The new school year hadn't started yet, and Matthew had slept over his grandmother's the night before, no doubt enjoying the last few days of summer break before heading back to class at Western Junior High School. Matthew knew his area of the Byram River well and would often fish along the banks of it, which was very close to both his and his grandmother's home. It was around 5 p.m. when Mary Ann came to pick her kids up and found the house eerily empty. She knew her mom had taken Stacy to an appointment, but Matthew was nowhere to be found. By 7 p.m., Mary Ann was panicked. This was not like Matthew at all. She called the police, who immediately began an intensive search for Matthew along the banks of the Byram River. Eyewitnesses reported seeing Matthew throughout the neighborhood that day. He had purchased milk and a pastry from the Sparta Deli, then rode his bike heading toward a nearby bridge. A woman had drove past him and asked him how the fish were biting. He proudly showed off his catch. The last time anyone saw him alive was between 5 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. that day, according to a police timeline of Matthew's last hours. The search for Matthew continued into the night and throughout the weekend. Search and rescue canines were brought in to scour the rocky terrain of the Byram River. Police went door to door asking residents if they had seen Matthew or if they noticed anything suspicious in the area. Marianne spoke to her son through the newspaper. She said to the Hartford Courant, quote, "I want him to come home, and I love him, and I want him to know he's not in any kind of trouble." Marianne remembered a conversation she had had prior to Matthew going missing. He asked about a wooded area just above Pembroke Road. He never explored that big stretch of land, and Marianne told him not to go alone because it was remote and tricky to navigate. So Marianne and her boyfriend made a trip to that very location to see if they could locate Matthew. When they got there, they were hit by a strong smell of decay. Some local residents and a team working on the power lines below had reported the same foul odor to the police, but the authorities thought the smell was probably from fish that had been cleaned by the river, a popular spot for local anglers. They dismissed the idea that it could be Matthew. In the meantime, Greenwich Police Youth Officer Michael Panza told the Hartford Courant that they'd exhausted every lead and had searched every place by air, land, and sea that Matthew could possibly be. Until they had a piece of clothing, a credible sighting, or a solid lead to follow, their extensive, organized search would come to a close. After a family vacation, volunteer firefighter Fred Lambert returned home to Greenwich late on August 31st. Fred was a member of the Glenville Fire Department and had heard on his scanner that the police were looking for a missing person. The next day, he learned who they were looking for. Fred would often see police and volunteers searching for Matthew, including in and around an area called the Mill, where he was a superintendent. Since he was familiar with the surroundings, he decided to join in the search. On September 5th, around 3 p.m., while searching the area of the Mill, Fred found a single black and white checkered sneaker, which was described as what Matthew was last seen wearing. He marked the area with an old bicycle tire and contacted the police. As they searched, Fred noticed it first: a small body buried partially under rocks, branches, and leaves. A 10-inch boning knife was found nearby. "I can remember it as vivid as ever," Fred said. "I went in and it changed my life forever. The pall hanging over you. It's a lousy feeling. Would I do it again? Yes." The discovery of Matthew's body was a turning point. It wasn't just the loss of a young life, it was the violent manner in which it was taken that left everyone in shock. Please, if you're sensitive, heed the trigger warning before I continue. Matthew had died from multiple stab wounds to his chest, as well as traumatic asphyxiation. He was found only wearing his underwear and one sock. His t-shirt had been twisted up and knotted around his neck, and his other sock, along with dirt, leaves, and a 5-inch long stick, had been shoved down his throat. There was dirt in his lungs, which meant that he had been alive at the time and inhaled some of the debris. Dr. H. Wayne Carver, who had performed the Sandy Hook school shooting autopsies many years later, performed the autopsy of young Matthew. He said although Matthew's shorts had been removed, there was no evidence he was sexually assaulted. That's good, I guess. The Greenwich Police Department quickly launched an extensive investigation, determined to bring Matthew's killer to justice. However, the case quickly became complex, with few leads and no clear motive. Our town was left to wonder who among us could commit such a disgusting act against a child. The boning knife found in the woods was sent to the state's crime lab, along with other evidence collected there. However, it turned out that much of this evidence was useless because it quickly became contaminated. Get this. The Greenwich Police Department used an animal control division truck to transport the evidence from the crime scene. I mean, come on. It also didn't help that the police bungled the investigation from the jump. In addition to transporting important evidence in a freaking animal control van, during the first few days of the investigation, Matthew's family was told that he was probably just hiding in the woods. When they learned his parents were divorced, they switched tactics and suggested he took off to go live with his dad in Texas. And even though they finally admitted, 48 hours later, that foul play was probably involved, a detective was not assigned to the case until days later. You know, I'm just going to say it. There was a saying going around town that if you wanted to get away with murder, do it in Greenwich. In the meantime, the Greenwich PD engaged the services of famed FBI profiler John Douglas, who determined that the suspect was most likely a white male who was familiar with Matthew's love of fishing. He said he was probably a classic loser with low self-esteem and a possible drug or alcohol problem. Additionally, Douglas described the murderer as a typical psychotic sexual sadist, saying that inflicting pain was what got his rocks off. Several of the teenage boys who lived in Pembroke, aka the Happy Valley, were known as the Valley Boys. Many were known troublemakers, or at least had the reputation. They liked to hang out, smoke pot, and cause trouble from time to time. Nothing sinister, nothing murderous. At least, not that I was aware. My own opinion, of course. You know, now that I think of it, all the guys kind of look like this. Or this. Since the cops believed that Matthew knew his murderer, many of the Valley Boys were interviewed. I know for a fact that at least one of them, a 17-year-old I was friendly with, was shown pictures of the crime scene and questioned extensively, the cops hoping for a confession from him. They didn't get it. Over the years, several suspects emerged, but none led to a conviction. Theories ranged from a single random act of violence to a targeted attack on Matthew. Despite all efforts, the case went cold, leaving more questions than answers. After Matthew's body was found and no suspect arrested, rumor and innuendo crept throughout Greenwich. There was one suspect that surprised absolutely no one, a sullen, angry bully about 4 years older than Matthew who had lived in my neighborhood but then moved to Matt's. This person, whose name I won't mention, was a real creeper. Allegedly, supposedly, my opinion only. He had assaulted not one but 2 other teens in town, and as a juvenile was convicted of attempted manslaughter for the attack on one of them, a 13-year-old named Jeffrey Payne. I'm going to let Jeff tell the story, but full disclosure, Jeff's a hard watch, so please be kind. I'm no therapist, but if you ask me, Jeff's still dealing with major PTSD.
Good. Everybody knew he was no good. And I gave him sort of a chance. Like, I didn't know better. I was only 13, you know? Only 13. Anyway, he came up to the park one day where I was playing, you know, the Hamilton Avenue School, and I guess he was watching me. He seen me go there. Somehow he was following me around. He knew where I was. He asked my sister where I was going to be that day. He met her on the street. And he wasn't interested in her. No, he was interested in a little boy. And he asked her where I was, and she told him. She didn't know better either. And she was only 11. So he was like 17 already. He went up to the school, I guess, and he asked me if I wanted cold soda. It's hot out. I said no, because I knew he was a bully already. He bullied me around on the football field when we played football. Well, anyway, long story short, 3 times a lady asked me the 3rd time, cold Coke on a cold soda on a hot day. It's afternoon, it's 3 or 4 all day long, about 30 minutes. I thought we were going to the store down the corner. He said, we're going to go get soda to the workers. My dad leaves soda for the workers there, so we can get there for free. Anyway, it's a basement apartment. It's getting renovated, he said. So I opened he goes, go on in, look for the soda. So I opened the door. He's behind me. The door's open. So I open the door, and it's all sheetrock, you know, everything, tiles. I still remember exactly how it was. Anyway, he takes me in. I go into he goes, look for the soda. So I go in the first room, scan the room, no soda. Take a right, go next room, no soda. Go to the bathroom, no soda. And there's just a basement area. I realized suddenly I'm in trouble. I got me and the biggest bully in town between me and the door. And before I could even do anything, when I realized I was in trouble, smashing my head into a pile of tiles, knocking me out, shaking me awake, smashing my head into another pile of tiles, shaking me awake, you know, dragging me into another room. I can remember this all later. This happened in a flash. And from there, you know, he said, lay down, go get on the carpet, lay down. All right, then he straddled me, stabbed me 5 times in the back with a framing nail. They didn't go that deep. The detective said later that if they went deep enough, they would have killed me. Each one was a fatal wound. It went deep enough. After that, he asked me to pull down my pants. And the doctor said he would have been asking a dead boy to pull down his pants. Maybe doing the thing with a dead boy, with a dead kid. Anyway, after that, he got up. After he said pull down your pants, I knew what he wanted to do, and I'd be dead after that. Well, the killer be killed instinct went into effect right away. There was no flight or fight because he was going to check the only entrance. There was only one way out. All right? The people that lived upstairs came home with their groceries, and neither one of us could finish the other guy off.
Jeff's theory is that this person, who was named an official suspect, though to be honest, I'm not sure if he was ever cleared, thought that it was Jeff fishing at the river. Maybe he saw him from a distance, or maybe his back was to him, but he attacked Matthew before realizing it wasn't him. And once the attack started, the psycho felt he had to finish the job. I'll leave a link to Jeff's channel in the description box so you can check out more of his videos on this. While the cops investigated this nut job for Matthew's murder, they soon found he had an alibi. He had been working at the local Wendy's during the time of the assault. However, months later, when they were tying up loose ends, they found his time card had been altered. He never clocked out for lunch, meaning nobody knows exactly when he left or when he returned. Did they re-interview his coworkers or his manager or even him? I really don't know. There were other suspects that police looked at who they felt fit the bill for this crime. A Valley boy who also had a reputation as a bully and had been recently arrested for rolling logs into the street from an area around the crime scene and for growing copious amounts of ganja in his house. Hate to break it to you, coppers, just about everyone I knew from Pemberwick was growing something out of their home. Anyway, a year after Matthew's murder, they finally served a search warrant on the suspect, but nothing of note was found. They also looked into two other men, a known pedo in the area and a 32-year-old weirdo who sexually assaulted a young jogger along the Byram River a year prior. Want to guess how those leads panned out? Another boy from nearby Portchester, New York, was also investigated. Check this out. Before Matthew's body was found, the Greenwich police received a strange phone call from the Portchester Police Department, where the suspect's father was a police officer. They asked about a homicide in Greenwich, even though the police hadn't yet found a body or even determined a homicide had occurred. After Matthew was discovered in the woods, this call seemed a little sus, so the Greenwich PD had an unofficial sit-down with the teen, where they learned that he knew Matthew and often fished in the area where Matthew's body was found. If I understand correctly, he was found with Matthew's fishing rod and knife in his possession, but he said that Matthew had sold them to him. Mary Ann strongly disagrees. They were gifted to him from his grandfather, and no way would Matthew part with them. In any event, the cops pressed the boy and his father for a more formal interview, as well as a polygraph test. They agreed, but didn't show up for either. On the day of the polygraph, they ceased cooperation with authorities altogether. Even with a body, the murder weapon, an FBI profiler, a psychic, potential witness hypnosis, a request to NASA for satellite imagery, and a handful of possible suspects, absolutely nothing panned out. Without concrete evidence, it was difficult for Greenwich PD to draw definitive conclusions. To this day, the case remains open and unsolved. Snark aside, the murder of Matthew Margolies had a profound impact on the Greenwich community. Fear replaced our sense of security, and our parents became a bit more vigilant. Matthew's death was a stark reminder of the fragility of life. It brought us closer in some ways, but the shadow of his loss loomed over us for years. Even decades later, the pursuit of justice for Matthew Margolies continues. Advances in forensic technology and renewed interest in cold cases have brought hope that one day his killer will be found. And despite my obvious disappointment in the Greenwich Police Department at the time, I do believe wholeheartedly that they remain committed to solving this case and bringing closure to Matthew's family. A memorial to Matthew Margolies can be found on the Byram River Bridge. The plaque is embellished with the image of a fish attached to a fishing pole and reads, "An excellent angler and now with God, Matthew Margolies, 1971 to 1984. I'm really hopeful that the true crime community, through podcasts, YouTube, and websites, can shed new light on this awful cold case. The tragic death of Matthew Margolies is a haunting reminder of the evil that can lurk even in the safest of places. As we remember Matthew, we also honor the resilience of a community that came together in the face of unimaginable loss. Thank you for joining Stud and I in revisiting this case. If you have any information that could help solve the mystery of Matthew's death, please contact the Greenwich Police Tip Line at 203-622-3333 or toll free at 800-372-1176. Tips may also be emailed to tips@greenwichct.org. Please help us bring justice to Sweet Matthew.